This episode is brought to you by the Pelora Group.
Welcome back to Winning Through Culture.
I'm Tim Flanagan.
And I'm Amanda Kramer.
When culture's not a priority, people aren't a priority. Having an intentional focus helps you as a leader remain impactful and relevant as you move your business forward.
Welcome to Winning Through Culture. Today, we are excited to bring back a Winning Through Culture Greatest Hits. When we do this, we are looking for an episode out of our library that we have heard from you, our listeners, that has been the most impactful and meaningful as it relates to helping you create an intentional culture in your organization and or has helped you grow as a leader. So without further ado, we're going to turn it right back to... So welcome back to another episode of Winning Through Culture. I'm really excited today to be here with Tim live again to talk about 3 topics that we're actually going to string together as they relate to the culture that you're intentionally building in your organization. And so the first one up today that we're going to just dive right into is this concept of being aware of creating a culture of busyness. And I cannot tell you the number of times I've asked somebody how they are, how their day is going. And the answer I get most often is, I'm good, but I'm busy, or I rather be busy than bored. And so I think this theme has just been kind of hitting me in the face, honestly, the last few weeks. And so I think it's definitely worth some dialogue around how you are being conscious and how you are portraying the amount of work or the busyness that might exist in your organization. So Tim, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's great to be with you again. And I think this is a very interesting topic as we were preparing for our time together. Busyness seems to have become a status symbol in our society.
Yes.
I know I could be accused of saying the same thing. I don't say I'd rather be busy than bored, but I definitely, when someone says, how are you doing? I catch myself now, though, because I've been challenged by a couple of my mentors to stop saying you're busy. That's right. Not a very descriptive term, and it's not terribly endearing. That doesn't really mean anything. And I think the topic is timely. At least in my mind, the velocity of our life seems to be accelerating somewhere in par with technology. But now you have this whole emergence of artificial intelligence accelerating technology even faster. But yeah, I think there's a real issue. I know I struggle with this affliction that if you're busy, it must be important and you must be making progress. But that is a lie when you really unpack it. It's not the truth. And being busy isn't impressing anyone.
Right.
It's exhausting you and your team. And again, as a leader, I think, in the context of winning through culture, what type of culture are you intentionally creating? Are you creating a culture that in essence embraces and rewards busyness over productivity and success?
Well, and honestly, the article that you have there was one that has really resonated with me. So it's from the Harvard Business Review. And the thought in there is that busyness, as you said, has become almost a status symbol. And so much so that employees are being rewarded, and it's not a bad thing, but people are being rewarded for, air quotes, how hard they work versus how productive or meaningful or impactful their work actually is in the overall scheme of the vision or mission of the organization. So I think it is. It's a very important topic. And, we're all about talking about how you're intentionally building a culture, and whatever is being modeled ultimately is what is being accepted. So it's a really important note to really think about. As you said, you catch yourself not saying I'm busy, because that's not really very conducive to showcasing the work that is actually being done to move the business forward.
Well, and I think the velocity of change and the velocity that so many of us, or I'll say I am moving, also crowds out margin and crowds out the opportunity for reflection. And I am currently reading a fantastic book by Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy, 10X is easier than 2X. And what's fascinating about that book is a 2X mindset is really just work harder and get incremental growth. Now, I think some people hear 10X and they're like, well, that's working 10 times harder. But that's not the construct of the book. Is you cannot work 10 times harder.
Right.
You have to completely shift your frame of reference in how you work and what you work on and what your unique ability is and how you bring that to the world. And I think that's the piece that because this trend of making busyness as a status symbol, it just causes you to wear yourself out. And then, then you turn to behaviors that are probably not terribly productive to zone out of the busyness.
I'll say it's then coping.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Or anesthetizing through social media or other substances, or just totally zoning out in front of a television or Netflix or some show for hours on end, or a game. And that's not healthy either. So yeah, I think this concept of busyness and the intentionality, I know for me right now, I'm really taking a look at what am I spending my time on and how is it truly moving the needle forward. And I do believe part of the affliction of busyness is it kind of creates more busyness.
Yes.
And in doing that, you end up most likely doing work that may seem important, but truthfully is not really moving anything forward. It's just creating more busyness.
Yeah. Well, and we've really leaned into several tools in our organization, which again, through this podcast, we're able to talk about real examples that we are living every day. And there are lots of tools that a leader, an entrepreneur can utilize to really think about the stages of work. And there are things out there, and we've talked about them before, being DISC or Colby or what have you. And one that we've recently started to look at and really hone in, and I think it's very applicable here. So it's the second theme that we're going to be discussing in this podcast today, is really around how do individuals spend or have the ability to spend the most time in what we consider their working geniuses, which provides the most joy, fulfillment, and ultimately engagement in the work product and the progression of that through their career. And so we recently have started having dialogue around working genius, so much so that we're utilizing it because it truly is a productivity tool. Some are personality or just general assessments, but working genius as a whole is really more focused on the productivity component and really making sure that individuals have the opportunity to live in their working geniuses, recognizing that all six are necessary in every work scenario. But I think it really does help kind of eliminate that distraction and reduce the either guilt or judgment around busyness that might be put into the workplace.
Yeah, so Working Genius is a product of Pat Lencioni and his team and the Table Group. It's a great story. Pat developed a tool during COVID to really understand how he and his team worked effectively together and how other teams work together. And you're certified, so you're much more qualified for this than I am. But I do believe in our short span of working with the tool, it's really helped us identify, everybody's got working competencies. Some of them are working geniuses. And I know for us, as we went through a session with our team, it became really apparent very quickly where people's working geniuses lied and how that showed up in meetings and in conversations, and conversely, where their working frustrations lied and how that showed up in meetings and conversations and projects. So I'll let you take a deeper dive, but we've used many tools in our business and there are plenty of great tools out there, but this is a really fascinating tool to get a quick snapshot of where someone's going to show up in their genius, where they're going to be able to get by and where they're going to get frustrated. It's been super helpful to me as we think about who should be in the room for certain conversations and meetings and projects. And quite frankly, who shouldn't be in the room because they're only going to get frustrated and worn down by it. And again, that gets back to busyness, throwing a bunch of people in a room for a meeting that don't need to be there.
Right.
So,
absolutely.
So I'll let you unpack the Working Genius tool a little bit more, being that you're certified. But again, from an intentional culture perspective, what a fantastic tool to really embrace.
Yeah. And I think, of course, it has two applications. One being as an individual, as a leader, it is a great time, as you just mentioned, about taking the reflection component. So thinking about how you are showing up for yourself and your team and your family, because it is both personal and professional. Again, it's a productivity tool. So it's looking at the stages of work and the necessity of each of the geniuses to be there. And every person, every individual is a 6-letter person, is what we like to say. So you have all of the geniuses, you have the capability to flex into any of the spaces, but you have 2 that are just inherently you, that if you could spend 80 or more % of your time in those 2 areas, then you have the ability to have the most fulfillment and joy in your work and in your life. And so then, as you mentioned, you have 2 competencies. Those are areas in which you flex into, you're good at. and you have the ability to spend a good bit of time there. But after a while, it actually will create more burnout than you spending time in your frustrations because it is a flex for you. And when you think about your working frustrations, it is something that you would spend a short period of time in. And yes, it will call in a particular opportunity that you need to flex to your frustration. But being aware, a great leader in the sense of working genius is an aware leader. The ability for you to have that self-reflection, to know how you're showing up, to know how you are reacting, and the scenario that you're creating and modeling for those that are around you. So when we look at it, we're really utilizing it in the team mapping concept. And so that really shows you, as you think through the stages of work, which there are 3, you have that ideation stage. So in that, you really want to ensure that you have the working geniuses of wonder and invention. And all of these are a call to action, basically. So something is causing this scenario and something is then responding to that scenario. So when you work through all of the stages of work, you see where if you're skipping a step, you're skipping a person, you're skipping somebody on your team. And so really making sure that you have the ability to work through ideation appropriately, come up with all of the ideas, then move into what we consider activation, which is discerning the best ideas. So you have discernment, and then you have galvanizing. You have to have the ability to rally a group of people, whether it's the team that might be in the room, or maybe you need to pull other people in from other constructs in your organization to really make sure that everybody has the concept and the content and the context to be able to facilitate the best idea that you've discerned is going to move your business forward. And then you move into implementation. And implementation really lies with the ability to have enablement and then tenacity. So enablement is the ability to look to someone 1v1 and say, you need help. How can I help you? And here are a couple of ways in which I can facilitate that help in the construct of whatever work project you have discerned as a team is the best one to move forward with. And then you have tenacity, and that genius has the ability to really blow through any obstacles that are in the way to get the idea or the project to completion, to put that bow on it, and to really have that measurement of success tied to whatever the idea or project has been discerned is the best one. So when we look at it, we're making sure that when we're having these conversations, we have the right geniuses in the room, and we are really leaning into the ability to regulate our geniuses. So as a leader, you're going to have 2 working geniuses, 2 competencies, as well as 2 frustrations. And that doesn't mean that you won't live in one state or another for any given time, but just making sure that you have the ability to put the right people in the room for the right conversation. So then you can actually be more efficient, and the ability, right, as we were discussing around busyness, to reduce that in your conversations with your team.
Yeah, so I'll give an example.
Yeah.
And I'll use myself.
It's always the best one, right?
So I have a working genius of invention. And the way that shows up is I am full of ideas. If someone presents a problem, my mind immediately goes into solution mode. Or if I see something that's an opportunity, I immediately go into how do we seize this opportunity? Mind you, that may not be something that should be pursued, but that's where my mind goes. And as we were learning this tool as a team, we were having a meeting, and there were 5 of us in the room. Mm-hmm. I was the only one with a working genius of invention. And we had 3 people in the room that had a working frustration of invention. And all of a sudden it hit me. I was like, wait a minute. When I'm in these meetings coming up with all these ideas and people are looking at me like I'm crazy or they're annoyed with me, it's because I'm just leaning into their working frustration. It's not what I have to say. It's not necessarily the process of invention. Right. It's just I'm talking to a group of people that are like, dude, just tell us what you want to do and we'll go do it. Now, the beauty of that is that same group all had discernment as a working genius. And it also, though, as the leader, I realized that if I was not stepping back and allowing them to step into their working genius of discernment, then I was kind of shutting down the conversation.
Right.
And so now I, with this awareness, show up and say, here's some things you guys discern.
Right.
what you think is the right path, the right person, the right situation. And so it's been really interesting because it's helped me, and I think it's helped everybody on our team. To your point, you said something earlier, Amanda, is not feel guilty or feel bad, like, I don't get what's going on here, or this is annoying me. Worse yet. So, and I'm not sitting there thinking, man, is nobody interested in this conversation? Or am I making everybody mad, by the way I'm saying this? And it's just, again, it was such a light bulb moment for me specifically. And I think it also leads to something I'm guessing you're going to talk about, which is you talk about diversity on so many different levels, but having a diversity of working geniuses on your team and in the room, you see so critical. So why don't you speak to that?
Yeah, so necessary. So as I shared regarding the stages of work, you really need to keep in mind the type of meeting that you're having, as you mentioned earlier. So you were the individual with invention. We had our working geniuses of discernment, and then we had one individual, which is me. So I'll talk about myself here with tenacity. And so I realize and regulate that when we're in an offsite brainstorm, that is where I am very quiet because I am taking in and allowing everyone to lean into their geniuses on the team. And I'm not automatically going to, here's 32 ideas that just got put on the table. I will go straight to, okay, so here are the 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 112 steps that are going to have to happen to make that idea come to fruition. So I know that I don't need to lean into my geniuses until we've discerned the best idea, or rather the team has discerned the best idea, and we've moved through the stages of work, and then we are finally at implementation. That's where I need to kick in and really lean into my geniuses. So the ability to make sure that you're not skipping a step, which is ultimately skipping a person, is very important. But you need to make sure that you do have diversity of thought, which comes to fruition through the geniuses in your conversations, but really utilizing the tool to understand how you can regulate where you need to step into your geniuses, your competencies, or realizing the meeting might be part of your frustration and knowing when you can either say, okay, I don't need to be part of this meeting, and that's all right. And also letting go of like your FOMO around that. Because I think everybody, going back to the conversation about busyness, like, oh, I'm in all these meetings.
Yeah.
I must be, adding that
must be important.
It must be important. All of these must be valuable. I must be sitting in the room to effectively move this particular idea or business forward. And that's not honestly the case. If we were able to really allow individuals to utilize their geniuses in selecting the meetings that they're a part of and allowing that time to be put back into the area in which provides the most joy and fulfillment for them, their work product is so much higher than an individual that is frustrated by wonder and invention sitting in a room for 3 hours. Like, then they're walking away and people are going to say, so how's your day going? You're like, well, I'm really busy. But are you busy because you're busy, or are you able to then regulate and know where that will ultimately come to a good end result?
Yeah, I was thinking about a meeting we had yesterday. We haven't had a chance to debrief on. As I listened to you, and I was like, I was in invention mode and everybody was looking for galvanizing and tenacity. And I was like, why is everybody so frustrated? And I realized, a couple of ideas hadn't been well discerned. And 2, everybody just wanted to know what we were doing and how we were going to get it done.
Yep.
So in spite of knowing this, it's still it's
a learning curve.
It's a learning curve.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
But it gives you a lens that you might not have had before, right? Because you don't just walk around. There's not this like neon sign above me. Well, maybe there is for me, but there's not this neon sign that says, okay, Amanda is enablement and tenacity. So I want to 1v1 look at a person and say, how can I help you in this situation? I want to provide what you need to be able to move forward. And then on the other side, I want everything, all the boxes checked. I want a nice bow on this. And I want to know that whatever we discerned is the best idea, we got all the way down to the finish line and scored the goal. And whatever sports reference you want to put there, we got all the way to the end.
Completion.
Yeah, exactly. Completion. And the ability to know that about an individual is really, really important. But again, somebody doesn't walk around like, again, with a neon sign that says this is where if they spent 80% or more of their time in this space, it would provide such joy in their work product that there would not be a conversation of, well, I'm busy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good tool. It's something that you can lean into and have some dialogue around. And it provides just a little bit more context about how everyone is showing up in those dialogues.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great tool. And again, for those listening that are either wanting to know more about themselves and develop their own self-awareness and emotional intelligence, it's another great tool to help you understand yourself a little bit better, how you show up. And for those leading people, fantastic tool, a small investment to take the assessments.
Yeah.
And again, I know we went to the extra level of getting you and Jason certified to use the tool because I think that's relevant for our business, but anyone can access this and,
Correct.
and use it as a way to learn, who's got what working geniuses and then ultimately how to apply them.
Agreed. And one thing to note, and as Tim and I were sharing earlier, if you followed along and winning through culture with us, a lot of times we'll kind of leave hints along the way of episodes that are in the future. And this is definitely one of them. Jason and I will be doing a deeper dive around working genius and how it is applicable to teams and your leadership reflection. And so that will be coming after the summer.
Awesome. Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
So another tool we've been using lately through our EOS relationship is, I affectionately call it the process.
Yeah, it is. It's the process of documenting processes.
And as an entrepreneur who for many years prided himself on new ideas, original thinking, spontaneity, as you scale a business and get more people in the business and are trying to be more consistent in what you do, it gets really difficult to kind of do all that on the fly and hope everybody has a clear picture of what they're supposed to do every day and how it's supposed to go.
Right.
And so we made a decision with a lot of coaxing in some respects by you with your tenacity to really look at how have we or how are we documenting the processes of our business so that we can then have them followed by all, which is a tenet of EOS. And it's been a fascinating experience. We're still in the process. We've gone through the first phase, but I thought it would be good. Again, when you think about creating an intentional culture and a winning culture, it's really difficult to have a winning culture when everything is somewhat ad-libbed or unknown to the team, because it's just, this freelancing creative ideas or ways of doing things. So why don't we chat a little bit about how, again, the process can help a business owner, entrepreneur, quite frankly, or an individual free themselves up.
Agreed. And we noted earlier about the concept of guilt and judgment. The ability through documenting processes really allows for you to have a clarity and reflection opportunity around what is happening today. What is the ideal state? And then ultimately, how do we simplify this process? And the reason that I brought up the idea of guilt and judgment is because when you are working through a process, if something is documented and there is an issue, there is an opportunity that is brought up, you can be hard on the process and kind on the person. So being that this episode is coming out in May and we're going to be concluding Mental Health Awareness Month, there is a mental component to knowing exactly what is expected of you.
Yes.
And that really allows you the most freedom to, again, tying all these things together, kind of live in your working geniuses and not have that answer when somebody asks how you are, that you're just busy, because you're being very intentional and productive in the work that you are putting forth and you know exactly what's expected of you. And so processes really allow us to document, as we shared, exactly the ideal state, knowing that there are going to be some anomalies. There's going to be decision points where something is going to move forward or it's a hard stop. And so when we were coming together and having this conversation, we have a lot of things that we do. And there are a lot of teams that overlap. Where is the trigger? Where does this team pick the ball up? And where does this team pass the ball off? And how do we effectively illustrate that so everybody knows who's on first, second, and third? And there eliminates that ability to say, why is that team doing that? Or I'm frustrated because, or what have you. Anytime those words come out of your mouth, you then have the ability to go back and say, where is the opportunity in the process? And you release that immediacy to blame or to look at a person. And so that was really on my heart as we were moving forward with documenting our core processes. Yes, we have all the things that we do every day that need to be written out in some way, shape, or form, put on paper, so to speak. But the ability to really dig in and say, okay, here's what's happening, our current state, here's our ideal state, and here are the opportunities that we have has been so insightful that teams are now coming to me saying, I want to document everything that we do. And I'm like, wait. We're starting with, let's call it 8 now. Yeah. There will be more as we go through this process, but documenting the process gives us that high level, the 20% that gives you 80% of the work product. And then you go even further to dig down into having checklists and SOPs, and the list goes on of what you can attach to a process. But it really allows, especially the ones that I've been working on and having additional meetings, I could hand this to somebody who has no context for our business, and they would know exactly steps 1 through whatever number it is, what to do and who owns it.
Yeah, what was fascinating to me, and again, I know so many businesses, manufacturing, technology, a lot of businesses might hear this and say, duh, because you can't run those businesses without a very clearly defined process.
Right.
And yet there are a lot of other entrepreneurial companies that don't have processes, whether they should or shouldn't, just don't. But what struck me is as we went through the exercise, and it's a very visual process mapping exercise, and I'm a very visual person, it's sort of the analogy of having a roadmap. If I said go to California, and that was all I told you, and you didn't have a map, you didn't have context, am I driving, am I taking the train, am I flying, am I walking, am I riding a bike, am I hitchhiking?
Yeah.
How am I getting there? Yeah. Am I telepathing there? How am I getting there?
Yeah.
And then there's so many different ways to get to California from Charlotte, North Carolina. So the whole idea of process mapping, to your point, Amanda, which I think, again, frees people up to do the work, to not be frustrated and confused, not to have everyone say, what the heck is going on? It's a very clearly articulated series of steps. And the other thing that jumped out at me as we went through the exercise is I immediately saw where there are issues in the business that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I now know exactly where they're breaking down. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, if the roadmap says drive, Highway 64 west to California until you pick up 70. I don't even know if those highways merge anywhere.
But I like that, though. In our world, they do.
Yeah, but if you eventually find out they don't, what highway do you need to take to get to 70? And that's, I think, the beauty of that process mapping exercise. And again, we're still in the early stages of getting everything on paper, making sure it's exactly what we all agree to. So then we can follow it. And more importantly, we can start to identify some of the challenges of the business that, again, back to busyness, create extra meetings that don't need to happen because people are trying to figure out why something isn't working. When you have the process map, it's super clear.
Yeah.
That part is not working.
Yes. And you get the right people in the room to solve for that, right? Yeah. Instead of, 15 people sitting in a room banging their heads against a wall. Like, how are you effectively utilizing the stages of work and, leaning into, if you're utilizing Working Genius, okay, do we have the right people in the room to solve for this? Mm-hmm. And are we being very cognizant that there is an opportunity in the process and we do not go to blaming a person? And so that's all going back to how we constantly think about how we are intentionally focused on the complete person. So making sure that we're being balanced in our approach. And, the process of documenting processes is something that's very simple to do. We invested in a relationship with a company to help get us started on this, but it is something that you can do whether you are a team of 1 or 25. It doesn't really matter your size. So it's good for any entrepreneur or business. And you have the ability, as I said, you're simply just, even if you were to sketch it out on paper or a whiteboard or sticky notes or whatever it is, just what is the process today, how you see it, where are the decision points in that process, and then where are the opportunities that you see that could either be, we could simplify, we can automate, clarify, whatever opportunity it might be. Is it not happening consistently today? Okay, then it's an opportunity. How do we take that? And we like colors in this, right? So how do we take that blue box, which is an opportunity box, and make it a yellow box, which is a step in the process that does not get skipped? And then the other part is understanding your cycle times. So for a manufacturing organization, like you said, like they can't operate without that.
Yep.
However, there are a lot of entrepreneur businesses that it's very in flux. So something could take 3 days or 12 days. And does that really matter? Well, it does, but like you need to have your ideal state. So then when something does go awry, you have the ability to look back at the process and say, okay, so this should have taken 7 business days. Okay, so it took 22. Why did it take 22 days? You can go back and modify your process. It's an iterative concept. You're constantly going back at least once a year to review what's working and what's not working, modify it to ensure that you're providing, as we were talking about busyness earlier, that people aren't just getting like in a loop cycle in the process. They have the ability to move forward pretty efficiently and progressively.
Yeah. And I think, when you tie it all together, which is what we wanted to do this morning in this podcast, is busyness again is not, there's a great saying I heard in C12 years ago, buried under Satan's yoke, which in essence means you're distracted with things that are not on your mission, not on purpose. And, it's an affliction in our society, certainly an affliction in business today. So how do you break out of that cycle? How do you really understand the people in your team, yourself, and their working geniuses? And then how do you put all that in a workflow process that frees everybody up to do the work, to quickly identify the opportunities, quickly identify the issues that are off track. And again, not hammer the person and blame the person, but fix the issue through the process with the right people in the room. And I think when we talk about creating an intentional culture and creating a winning culture and having a business that's got an edge over others, these are 3 very relevant, timely, and important topics to address in every business, in my opinion, these days.
Agreed. And, just foreshadowing a little bit to episodes to come, we're going to dig a little bit deeper and have some guests as well that will speak to how this has come to fruition in their business and their line of work or their role in the organization. So we hope you stay along with us. We are going to do a little bit of a greatest hits series over this summer just to have that reflection time ourselves, right? So we actually do practice what we share on this podcast. So looking forward to having some of those episodes be redistributed into the world that we are really excited about, still are really excited about how they're applicable to helping leaders, business owners, entrepreneurs stay impactful and relevant. And then we look forward to sharing more around the 3 topics that are honestly really well tied together that we discussed today as we come back from the summer.
Yeah. Hard to believe we're talking about the summer.
Yeah.
But the days are getting warmer, and the good news is they are longer. But it's great to be with you again today, Amanda.
Agreed.
Appreciate everybody being with us today. If any of this resonates with you, please put a comment.
Reach out
on our website. Reach out. Happy to talk to you more about it. Again, Amanda's the resident expert in our organization on Working Genius, but the Table Group, Pat Lencioni's developed a fantastic tool there. So
yeah, and we'll make sure to put the link in the show notes so everyone, if you're interested in exploring that a little bit more, definitely take a gander.
Perfect. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Winning Through Culture.
Until next time, stay intentional, be impactful,
because your culture matters.